All right, so this marks the beginning of period 4 of APUS history, and this covers starting with chapter 11, I think all the way up to chapter 17, if I remember correctly. So compared to the last period, period 3, which only covered 4 chapters, this covers 6 chapters, meaning that we'll be moving at a little bit of a quicker pace through the textbook material. So make sure that you're keeping up with your reading according to your syllabus. In the last period, we might spend 3 or 4 days on one chapter, but now we're going to be doing some chapters in 2 days, maybe even 1 day. So make sure that you're keeping up with things so that you don't get caught completely off guard when we eventually have a pop quiz, which could be at the end of, chapter 11. It could be any time. Always be prepared. So if you want to know the date for your next test, just check your syllabus. It should have it marked. So when we ended period 3, we had just finished John Adams's first term as president. So he's obviously up for re-election in 1800, and the election of 1800 is a very significant one for several reasons. The first is, while this is not our first exchange of power in the United States, of course we saw our first exchange of power when Washington was no longer president and Adams became president. This is going to be the first election where both candidates openly campaign, not just for themselves to win, but against the other candidate, why the other candidate should not win. Now, the Federalists will throw their support to John Adams, which is typically what parties do. They support the incumbent, which means the person who already holds that certain political office. And the Jeffersonian Republicans, I'm sure you can guess, they're obviously going to support Thomas Jefferson, who at the time was vice president of the United States. They're going to support his presidential bid. So right from the get, the two of them are constantly criticizing each other in the press. Jefferson published a letter that Hamilton actually wrote to him in secret, where Hamilton was criticizing Adams, which I might have mentioned in period 3, which was one of the reasons why, or it was in response to Adams firing Hamilton. So Jefferson did that to sort of show, like, oh, even other Federalists don't like John Adams. So John Adams wrote a bunch of things about Thomas Jefferson, and he accused him of being an atheist, which was not true. Thomas Jefferson was not an atheist. He wasn't necessarily a full-blown Christian. He was more of a deist, but he definitely was not an atheist. And at the time, in 1800, to accuse someone of being an atheist, you might as well accuse them of being the devil. So Thomas Jefferson responded by, in the press, calling John Adams a hermaphrodite, which basically means that he was born with both male and female sex organs and genitalia. Can't confirm whether or not that's true. I will say John Adams did have children, so it's probably not true. But John Adams responded by saying, well, Jefferson has mixed babies with one of his slaves, Sally Hemings, and also even told some of the press that Jefferson was dead and that voters shouldn't waste their vote by voting for a dead man. All of this doesn't necessarily make either of them look very good, but it certainly made Adams look worse. So when the election came down to it and all the votes were counted, it was a tie, but not between Adams and Jefferson. It was actually a tie between two Jeffersonian Republican candidates. It was a tie between Jefferson and another Republican, Aaron Burr. Now, through all of this, we might not have talked about it, but Aaron Burr's been in the background. He's been around. He fought in the Revolution. He knows Washington, knows Hamilton very well. He had been a Federalist for a while and then switched parties to become a Republican. He represented the state of New York, Hamilton's home state, and was a Northerner, just like John Adams. So he and Jefferson are now neck and neck. And so what happens, according to the Constitution, if there's a tie in the Electoral College, it is up to Congress to break that tie. So the two of them now don't have to convince the American voters to vote for them. They have to convince the Congress. Now, obviously, all of the Republican senators and congressmen are pretty much going to vote for Jefferson because that's like their dude. But the Federalists, it just depends on how much they hate Thomas Jefferson. Would they rather have Aaron Burr, this other Republican, be president than Thomas Jefferson? So they came down and started pestering Alexander Hamilton. Now, he had sort of faded into the background at this point because he had had a lot of family problems, got caught cheating on his wife, his son died, his wife miscarried, a lot of chaos going on in his personal life. So he sort of like retired from politics, but he was still a Federalist and he still wrote a lot and he still spoke about his opinions. So the Federalists asked Hamilton, who are you going to vote for? Or who would you vote for? Do you support Jefferson or do you support Burr? And ultimately, what Hamilton said was, I know them both very well. I've worked with Jefferson for a long time, and it's no secret that we don't get along. And literally every idea he's ever had, I've thought the opposite. We have never agreed on anything ever. But Aaron Burr would be a terrible president, and at least I can say that I have respect for Thomas Jefferson when I have no respect for Aaron Burr. So when it came time to vote, some of the Federalists didn't vote because they didn't want to vote for either based off of what Hamilton had said. And so that was all Jefferson needed for him to get the win. So Jefferson became president number 3. But what does that mean about his vice president? Oh, yes, it's Aaron Burr. But Aaron Burr had openly campaigned against Thomas Jefferson, tried to convince people not to vote for Jefferson. So they didn't get along. And we were already seeing leftover problems from when Jefferson and Adams didn't get along when they were president and vice president. So shortly after this, we will pass a new law and change the way that we choose our vice president. It will no longer be whoever comes in second place. Now, the other reason why this election is special, aside from like the chaos and the campaigning, is what Jefferson calls it. He calls it a revolution of 1800, not just an election of 1800. And that's because this is not just our first exchange of power. It's our second, but it's our first exchange of power between political parties. We went from the Federalists to the Republicans, and no one died, right? It might have been a little chaotic and certainly rude at times, but no one died. And in Europe, when one group takes over from another, typically it's the result of a war. So we were definitely able to use this to be like, look, we're above such things. We're above the violence of Europe. We know what we're doing here in America. We've got it together. So it definitely makes us look good, even if it all went down a little weird. So Jefferson's administration. We know that Jefferson is a strict constructionist. He is a fan of a weak central government. He favors state governments. He favors agrarian systems of economics. He is pro-France, but doesn't necessarily want to get involved in Europe's problems. And he'll put all those beliefs into action in a variety of ways. Overall, the goal of his administration is to reduce the power of the federal government. And he does that in several ways. And then he actually strengthens the power of the federal government in a few other ways. Right off the bat, as soon as he got into office, he was faced with his first day in office, he was faced with a crisis, which was leftover resentment from John Adams. So John Adams' last night as president, he issued an executive order to create 16 new judge positions. Now, that's the right of the executive branch, right? They get to appoint judge positions. And Adams was going to use that power to appoint 16 Federalist judges, so that when Jefferson became president the next day, all those Federalist judges could declare everything Jefferson did unconstitutional and stop him from being able to do anything as president. According to the law, those judgeships positions had to be delivered by a certain time, and James Madison was given one of those to deliver. He was supposed to deliver it to a man named William Marbury. He didn't deliver it. So, the next, shortly after, Marbury sued James Madison because of all those men became known as the Midnight Judges. So if you ever read about the Midnight Judges, that's what it's about. All these people that supposedly Adams was up till midnight appointing to their judge position. But William Marbury didn't get it, and that is the first case to reach the Supreme Court, Marbury versus Madison. Ultimately, what the Supreme Court decided was that this shouldn't have been possible. It shouldn't have been possible for any of this to happen. That was a mistake of the old Judiciary Act. So they declare, they basically dismiss Marbury's case, and they declare the Judiciary Act of 1789 unconstitutional. This is the first time the Supreme Court will declare a law unconstitutional, which establishes judicial review. It establishes the fact that the Supreme Court has the right to overturn a law passed by Congress or an order issued by the executive branch. And so they replaced the Judiciary Act of 1789 with a new one, the Judiciary Act of 1801. So Thomas Jefferson spends the rest of his time working to reduce the size of the federal government. He will shrink the size of the military significantly. He just basically has like a police force of like 2,500 people, when before we had, like tens of thousands of people in a full-blown army and navy. But Jefferson didn't want that. He didn't think we needed it because we weren't at war with anyone. Additionally, he will, remove a lot of positions from the executive branch. A lot less people work in the executive branch in various departments under Jefferson than they will under other administrations. And Jefferson hits his next bump in the road pretty early into his presidency, and it comes from that shrinking of the military. Now some countries think that we look weak and that we might be easy to pick on. So the first one to sort of get into our face was actually Tripoli. So Tripoli had basically thought that we owed them money, and they were upset with some deals that we had made. So they basically declared war on us. Tiny country. We didn't really want to have anything to do with it. We could have squashed all this with our old army very fast, but our new army is very tiny. So it'll take a little more effort to get it done with them. But ultimately, we do win the Tripolitan War, which is what this is called, in 1805, and we force Tripoli to sign a treaty. We basically pay them $60,000 to make them get off our backs. And so we're sort of blackmailed or like extorted into paying them that money. So some people were kind of critical of Jefferson for like just giving in that way. And others were saying, had you kept the government or had you kept our army large and strong, then like this never would have happened. But Jefferson sees it as a win because he's like, well, I did manage to get it done, right? Like I kept our army small and I kept our navy small, and we were still able to defend ourselves. Like we don't need this massive, huge military buildup, because he thought that could lead to negative consequences. So ultimately, he'll pretty much keep that going on at the same rate. Now, as far as other European countries, they're facing a lot of other issues at this time with their militaries. We're lucky that we have an ocean between us. In 1800, if you remember, up until this point, the Louisiana Territory and west of that, basically everything from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean was owned by Spain, all called New Spain. But when Napoleon took power and became the Emperor of France, he sort of like forced the King of Spain to give the Louisiana Territory back to France. And he held on to it for a few years, but over time it became clear that he was really focused on trying to conquer Europe. If you remember any of that from world history, maybe AP World, we know that Napoleon will be one of the strongest emperors, maybe the craziest, but one of the strongest for sure, to leave a legacy especially coming out of France. And he'll conquer a lot of land. That's expensive. The Napoleonic Wars racked up a lot of debt, and he needed to get rid of this land because it wasn't doing him any good. That Louisiana Territory land, it wasn't really doing him anything. They had already lost Haiti when the Haitian Revolution took place, so they really didn't he didn't care about any more land in North America. He was like, I already lost Haiti, I might as well just give this up too, instead of losing it. Maybe I can sell this. So he invites an ambassador to come to France and discuss this. So Thomas Jefferson, in 1803, will send James Monroe to Paris to have this discussion. Now, it was important for us to talk about this. We weren't going there thinking like, oh, we're going to get all this, we're going to buy all this land. What we were worried about was Pinckney's Treaty. Now, if you remember, when Washington was president, Thomas Pinckney went to Spain, signed Pinckney's Treaty, which gave us free access to the Mississippi River and the New Orleans port. But Spain doesn't own Louisiana anymore, right? France does, which means that we don't have access to the Mississippi or New Orleans, which we really need. It's important that we be able to trade with that entire area. So, because, we've got people moving into the Northwest, they need to be able to ship things along the Mississippi, and New Orleans is a massive port town. So James Monroe is prepared to buy the city of New Orleans and access to the Mississippi River. That's what he's authorized to do. We say $10 million. You go and you get as much land as you can, and you get New Orleans for $10 million. But, if they want to give you more land besides New Orleans for $10 million, we'll take it. But that's how much you're authorized to spend. $10 million, get the city of New Orleans. So he goes to meet with Napoleon, and Napoleon's like, I hear your offer, and I will do you one better. How about instead of $10 million for one city, I give you all of it for $15 million. And so that breaks out to roughly 3 cents an acre, less than 3 cents an acre, which is like the cheapest real estate purchase ever made. So obviously James Monroe wants to say yes, because that is a total steal, but he's only authorized to spend $10 million. So he has to write back to Thomas Jefferson and ask Jefferson for approval. Now, Jefferson really was conflicted over this, because if you remember, he's a strict constructionist. It does not say in the Constitution that the federal government has the power to purchase land to increase the size of the United States. So in Jefferson's mind, that's not something he has the power to do. However, not doing this would be stupid, because this is such a good deal, and we need this for trade purposes, and this would really benefit our country. So Jefferson is so torn, and he spoke to his advisors about this a lot. He spoke to Congress about it. Ultimately, though, everyone convinced him, like, dude, you got to do this. You have to take the deal. So he wrote back to James Monroe. They signed the papers, and we purchased the Louisiana Territory for $15 million. Probably the best real estate deal ever made in the history of America, unless you want to include us or the Dutch buying Manhattan away from the Native Americans for next to nothing. Now that we have all that land, what the crap is out there? We have no idea. Americans haven't gone that far. Some of them have traveled around the Mississippi River, but definitely no one's ever gone past it. And while the French and the Spanish may have held claim to it for the last couple hundred years, they haven't explored that land in any great depth at all. It's been mostly Native Americans out there for a long time. So Jefferson, he needs to know what's out there. He needs to know a variety of things. So he tasks 2 explorers, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, who were old pals of each other. He really hires Lewis and then tells Lewis he can bring a friend, and he brings William Clark along, and authorizes them to go on an expedition through this new Louisiana Territory. And they have several goals through this expedition. The first is to make a map of all of this. We need to know what it looks like. Obviously, we can't just take satellite pictures or anything. We need to know where the rivers are, the mountain ranges. We need to know what this looks like out there. Number 2, try to find a water route all the way to the Pacific Ocean. He thought that he could start with the Missouri River and follow them, because they knew the Missouri River went west, which it did from the Mississippi. He thought if we follow the Missouri River, maybe it goes all the way to the Pacific. That would be incredible for trading. Remember, we don't have railroads, so all of our country, all of our domestic trade has to happen either with horses and wagons or ship. So having a water route would really help. So that's goal number 2. Goal number 3, make friends with the Native Americans along the way. We'll need them in our back pocket. Find out what natives are out there, and then if you can make friends with them, that'll be great, because we'll be able to trade with them. And then task number 4, write down any new plants and animals that you discover along the way. They thought there could even be woolly mammoths still living out in this land. They had absolutely no clue. So any animals and plant life that they see, they need to document that as well. So their expedition takes a total of 2.5 years. They leave in 1804 and finally will make it back in 1806. They start along the Missouri River, work their way, and then they hit the Rocky Mountains. They've got to take a little bit of adjustment at that point, but they do manage to find through other waterways that it is possible to get from the Missouri River all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And the woman who helps them get them there, and yes, it is a woman, is a 15 to 16, we're not 100% sure, pregnant Native American girl named Sacagawea. So she actually, they met her when they, as they were, on their expedition, they ran across a Native American tribe, and there was a French guy living with them. We remember way back when the French held this land, they were great pals with the natives, and this French guy had been living with the natives and doing the fur trading, and he had won this Native American wife in like a game of poker or something, whatever their version of poker was. And he was like, here, you can take her with you. I don't care about her. You can take her with you. She knows the land. She knows a variety of Native American languages. She can teach you where to go, what to stay away from. She can help you translate things. She'll be a good asset. She was pregnant at the time, very pregnant. So they take Sacagawea with them, and she is basically the sole reason that they make it. There were several Native American tribes that they come in contact with along the way who would have scalped them and killed them and thought nothing of it because they saw them as dangerous. But Sacagawea was able to translate. Some of them she even knew and had connections to their tribes, so she was able to make that truly successful. She even gave birth to that child on this expedition and named him Jean-Baptiste. So they come back, and through this 2.5 years, they managed only one person even died, I'm pretty sure, and it wasn't even from anything crazy. I think it was just appendicitis or something. It was nothing that out of their control. You would have expected on a journey like this for things to be much more dangerous, and maybe someone drowned, someone get attacked by a bear, but everything actually was okay. When they made it back, Thomas Jefferson basically said, great, I love all of this work, but I'm not going to pay you for it. And that really was awful for Lewis and Clark. William Clark especially had a difficult time adjusting to life after this expedition. Sorry, not William Clark. Meriwether Lewis had a difficult time adjusting to life. William Clark had a great life after this. He got married. He had a kid, named it after Lewis. But Lewis was very depressed, and we saw in a lot of his journaling and diary entries and stuff that he kept saying that he didn't feel like he contributed enough to the world, and he would never be remembered, and he hasn't done enough, and he was really depressed. And then one day they found him with a shot to the head. Now, the conspiracy comes in. Obviously, a lot of people connect the dots of the depressive journaling and the bullet to the head as he killed himself. But there wasn't just one bullet in his head. There was two. So some people say that he was murdered. But is it possible to get shot in the head and live? 100%. So is it possible that he shot himself in the head, lived a few seconds, and thought he missed and shot himself again? Yes. Is it also possible that somebody killed him and it just happened to be a coincidence that he was going through a depression at the same time? Yes. But we will never know.